Welcome to the Secret Keepers podcast with your host, Kareen Zutleger. Join us as we uncover the hidden thoughts, stories, and moments that help bring light to the healing power of truth and examine how silence can affect us mentally, physically, and spiritually. We'll also share profound stories, interviews, and transformative narratives to help release ourselves from the hidden and step into healing towards inner peace, joy, and fulfillment. Now, here's your healing strategist and host, Kareen.
Welcome to the Secret Keepers podcast, and I'm your host, Kareen Zutleger. And today is going to be another solo podcast. Today, we're going to talk about what we reach for when we're hungry for meaning. Things like connection, communication, and consumption. Now, I've been researching this for quite some time now, over the last couple of years, and finding just what it means to me, how I've taken the things in my life and given meaning to all of the things that have happened, and how I've gotten into this space now, even being a podcaster and wanting to bring forth the secrets that people hold in their lives. So I want to start today by asking you something, not a rhetorical question, but an actual one. I want you to sit with it for a second, okay, before I keep talking. When was the last time that you felt genuinely full? Not the full from a meal, not busy full, but that deep, settled, quiet sense that your life has weight and meaning, and that you matter to the people around you and to something larger than yourself. So take a moment and think about that for a second. Now, if that question landed hard, or if the answer was, I can't remember when the last time was, this is the episode for you. And honestly, it's for me too. Because as I said earlier, I've been sitting with this question for myself for quite a while now. We live in the most connected, the most communicative, in the most abundant time in history. We have devices that give us access to everything, like information overload. Every person, every answer, every distraction. Within seconds, we can order anything we want. We can have it at our door tomorrow, even today in a lot of places. We don't have to leave our houses. We can work from home. We can order food in, whether it be groceries or from restaurants. We can hop on an electronic device and we can see people. We don't have to leave. We just stay in our house. And then we look at the food that we're eating, and a lot of it is so processed, our body doesn't even have to do a lot of work to digest it. But yet we're sitting, right? We're sitting all day. We're not moving our bodies, right? We can talk to somebody on the other side of the world in real time. And we have more than enough. Most of us in the United States, even if you are at poverty level, still have more than the majority of people across the world. And yet something is missing. Not for some people, but for most people. It's a quiet emptiness underneath all the noise, all the fullness in air quotes, and all the motion, right? I hear it a lot. I say it a lot. I'm so busy. Busy doing what? Scrolling on my phone, filling up time, but am I doing things that really matter? And it can be hard to name it, right? Because on the outside, it looks like life is fine. Life looks full. This was what was happening with me. I mean, I have an amazing life by all accounts. I really do. And yet there's still this emptiness that I'm feeling. So today I want to talk about why that is, what it costs us, and what I've come to understand about where meaning actually lives and why we keep looking for it in places that can't hold it. So I'm going to get a little personal today, and a lot more personal than I usually get, because I've spent a lot of time on this show and holding the microphone towards other people and their stories, which is amazing because I want to bring you a whole gamut of stories and people so that you can see you're not alone. But what I've realized quietly and slowly is that I've been a secret keeper too. I think I've always known, you know, um, and in ways that I haven't fully named, even here in this space that I built for that exact purpose. I'll go back as far as I think maybe around kindergarten. I stole some candy from the corner store, and well, it wasn't just me, it was me and my sister, and we got caught. And I remember crying and like begging him not to call my mom and dad because, oh man, holy hell was going to break loose if they found out we got busted stealing. And so the store owner, who had known us, most of our life, allowed us to just um, to write, "I will not steal," like 100 times. And when you're little, that seemed like a million. And I remember when we were moving, I was 8 when we moved from Milwaukee, and I can remember finding that writing. So let's talk about the 3 C's that I'm talking about, right? The connection, the communication, and the consumption, and what they do to our ability to feel like our lives mean something. So here's a statistic that should stop us in our tracks. The rates of loneliness have doubled in the United States since the 1980s. And we are the loneliest that we have ever been as a society at the exact same moment when we are the most connected we have ever been. And that's not a coincidence. That's a clue, right? This is information. Researchers who study social connection make a distinction that I think is one of the most important things any of us can understand. They talk about 2 kinds of connection: bridging and bonding. And bridging is broad, right? Think it's broad and it's shallow. It's your social media network, it's your followers, it's your acquaintances, it's the people you nod to at the school pickup. It might even be, the connections that you're making on Zoom. It is value. It creates a sense of belonging to a community, to a world larger than yourself. But then there's bonding, and bonding is deep and costly. This is where relationships are truly known, where you can say the thing that you're actually feeling and not edit it first, where your history is held by another person, where someone would notice if you disappeared. Like this is your bestie. These are the people that You could do the most terrible thing in the whole world, and no matter what, they still love you. This is your family, hopefully. Like 100% no. Like my sister, no matter what, would always have my back, and she sees me. And she would most certainly notice if I disappeared. The same thing with my husband and my children. But modern life, it has dramatically expanded bridging while quietly starving bonding. We have more connections than ever, right? Like, 5,000 followers, but we have fewer people who actually know us. That know like the depth of us, like what we're really dreaming and hoping for in our life. Like who would oh, who would be willing to sit with you, drive out to your house and sit with you when your dog dies. I am grateful I have those people in my life. Even if I didn't let her come, she offered. And that meant the world to me. The friends that call and say, like, I am so sorry, right? I'm so sorry you're going through that. These are the people that are bonding with you and meaning the actual felt sense that your life matters. That lives in the bonding. And it always has. It's built in the long conversations, the shared history, the relationships that have survived something. I have four besties from high school, four women that I still get together with almost 40 years later that know and have seen the evolution of me. In the fifth friend, unfortunately, I lost her a few years ago to cancer. And she was a friend that I made that she's a little older than me, but still was my bestie. But these are the people who have laughed with you, they cry with you, they know the depth of you. I can tell you, you know, these ladies that I speak of that are my best friends, we are all so very, very different. And yet, at the end of the day, the love is deep. We can talk about stuff and disagree and still love each other after the conversation. These are the relationships you cannot scroll your way to, right? These aren't those type of relationships. And I know what deep connection costs. I felt it literally, from both ends of the spectrum. I have a son, and when he was in middle school, he was going through some really heartbreaking, tough stuff. And it was hard on this mama heart. It was hard to witness him being bullied and tormented for who he is. People that he had been friends with since he was 4, shunning him, outcasting him for being who he is, the way he was created. And I, as his mama, had to watch it happen up close and personal. All my love, right? With all my love. But I had no power. I had no power to absorb it for him. I had no power to save him from it. But what I remember about that time is that I didn't just worry for him from the outside. I recognized what he was experiencing. It was the feeling tone that I was able to recognize, not the situation itself, but the feeling of being seen as wrong or other or something that needs to be corrected or hidden. That I knew. I knew that feeling. And like I said, not because of the same circumstances, but because I'd been on the receiving end of that type of judgment for the choices I made when I was young, as a little while, for who I was, for not fitting the shape that was expected of me. I was an unwed mother in a society that even in the early 90s was still saying, sinner, sinner, sinner. And I carried that weight, that shame, that guilt. But that empathy that I was feeling for him, that comes from your wounds. That comes from you experiencing things like that, where it makes you relatable. That's emotional intelligence. And it's one of the most bonding forces that exists. But it's also one of the most costly because his pain didn't just worried me, it echoed in me. That's what real connection does. It costs something. It reaches past the surface and touches what's actually there. And that capacity to be moved by another person, to let their reality land in you, is not a weakness. It is the mechanism of meaning. So here's what I want to ask you as you're listening. Where in your life are you bridging when you're actually hungry for bonding? Are you starving for bonding? Where are you connected to many people, but truly known by almost none? And what would it cost you? What would you have to risk to let someone in a little further? We communicate more than any humans who have ever lived, and we are understood less. I mean, they say that the average human being has an attention span less than a goldfish because of all the scrolling, the constant bombardment of electronic devices, something telling us that we need something outside of ourselves to be fulfilled. So think about that. The average person, they send hundreds of messages a day, and we're in constant contact, right? And yet most people feel profoundly unseen. People want to be seen. We want to be heard. We want to be valued, right? Worthy, connected, safe. But we feel profoundly unseen, not because no one is watching, but because being watched is not the same as being known. There's a researcher named James Pennebaker who spent decades studying what happens when people put their true experience into words. What he found was remarkable. When people write or honestly speak about difficult experiences, things that they've been carrying, things they've never said out loud, their immune systems improve. Their mental health improves. Their relationships improve. Their bodies improve. Literally, Their bodies respond to the act of honest communication. Bessel van der Kolk talks about this in The Body Keeps the Score. The word spoken honestly heals something. My mentor, Joseph McClendon III, talks about this, right? As I think, so I feel. As I feel, so I do. As I do, so I have, right? The words we speak, the thoughts I think, the food I eat, the air I breathe, etc. But the communication environment we live in is built for the opposite of that. Social media, texting, your social feed, these systems reward the polished version of you, not the raw. And for recovering perfectionists such as myself, it leaves me in a paralysis, thinking if I don't put it out there and it's not perfect, but I don't care anymore. I don't. I'm in my later part of my 50s, approaching 58 years old, and I honestly don't care anymore if it's perfect. I want people to hear what I have to say. And because I have a lifetime of wisdom. So these polished versions, right? These, flawless skin and, their vacations. And we go on great vacations. I've stopped posting them on social media. That life is for me and my family to see. It's not for the hot take, right? The thing that gets the likes, the nuance doesn't travel. Complexity doesn't go viral. What travels is the performance of a life, not the life itself, right? So we're like kind of like actors out there, but are you really truly finding meaning in what you're doing? So we have a world full of people broadcasting constantly and being received rarely. A secret, and this is at the heart of everything I do on this show, is what happens when something true cannot be spoken. When an experience, a feeling, a part of who you are gets sealed away because it feels too dangerous, too shameful, too complicated to bring into the light. And here's what I've learned from every guest who has sat across from me in Zoom and from my own life. The secret doesn't disappear, right? It just keeps getting stuffed down. It goes underground, but then it finds other ways to express itself through anxiety, through physical illness, through patterns in our relationships you can't seem to break, through a low grade numbness that's hard to explain. The body keeps the score. The unspeakable things, these keep us stuck. These are just in languages that are harder to hear. You don't quite understand why you're having stomach issues or intestinal issues, but yet you're carrying things that you just have never shared with anyone. Now, what's really important is I want to tell you, I am not saying to like get on social media and start talking about your stuff. That's not what I'm saying. But we all need somebody to talk to. I'm not a therapist. I'm a transformation and healing strategist. I'm somebody to talk to. I'm somebody to help work through your things. But if it's deep, there's therapy. And I'm a big believer in therapy. So I've spent years asking other people to speak their secrets, right? I've been almost 2 years with this show, with this podcast, having people share their stuff, to say the thing that they've been carrying. And somewhere in the process of building this for other people, I realized, I've kind of been keeping some stuff, right? And there are things that, I talked around in my first solo podcast, right? Some of the things from childhood that shaped me in ways that I'm still mapping out, experiences in my body, things that were done without consent, losses that hit me so hard. Losing my dad, losing my brother, losing my best friend and my mom all in the same year. Those two, 2021. 2021 was a kicker for me. It just kept rolling the punches. But I just kept standing back up. There was so much going on. I just really didn't even know how to grieve it separately. Just kept going, just kept showing up, kept holding space for everybody else. But what I've come to understand is there's a difference between surviving and integrating. I've been really good at surviving, and I'm still learning integration. And what all that means is that letting what happened to me actually move through me, not around me, right? Letting it be spoken. Even when speaking, it feels like it might break something open. The grief, the different levels of grief that I've felt, they've been consuming at times. And I've had to make peace with the fact that grief doesn't follow a timeline. It is not linear. Waves of emotion can hit you when you least expect it. For me, it can be a big trigger. Dad's been gone almost 20 years, so I'm much more able to hear a song, and my dad loved music, and then hold that space in my heart and have that be a polished memory, right? Grief doesn't resolve because you're ready for it to. I mean, that'd be great. But it's asking to be witnessed, not managed. And there's so many forms of grief. And But it was in June of 2021, I had attended a retreat, and I did this 7 generation meditation, and it was so profound. It left me like just speechless. And that is hard to do, trust me. But in this meditation, you go through the lineages on your mom's side of the family. And we went back 7 generations. And I happened to have all of those women's name in my phone, not knowing that we were going to do this meditation. So we'll just talk about that, right? And I met every one of them, and they were in a field. And the first one told me, that they were glad I was there, and that I was, they'd been waiting for me, and that I was the cycle breaker. Went to the next one, pretty much verbatim the same thing, until I got to my grandma, my mom's mom, and she died when I was 4 months old. And she said, I said, Grandma, why did you die so when I was so young? And she said, I had to for you to take your rightful place as the cycle breaker, and that I was here to heal all different levels of grief, and that it wasn't mental illness that was happening to the women in our family, that, it was the loss of husbands and the grief of losing babies and, children, and the grief of lives unfulfilled. And then I got to my mom, and she's rocking a baby and saying, "You're my angel." And then I just cried after. I didn't even know what to do with all of that. But I'm telling you this story because I think some of you are carrying things right now that you're convinced yourself don't count. Or maybe it's not bad enough. I didn't have it as bad as, and so I'm okay. I'm fine. I'm fine. I'm fine. I hear that so much. I'm fine. Really? Really? Maybe you believe it's too complicated to explain. I want you to know the things you haven't said yet, anything that you haven't said yet is probably exactly the thing that most needs to be said. So, where in your life has something true gone unspoken for so long that it started to express itself in other ways? In your body, in your sleep, in the way you pull back from people who get too close. You don't, like I said, you don't have to say it publicly. You don't have to come on my podcast and say it, but find one person, one safe person, and say the sentence that you've been holding back and see what happens to your body when you do, when you free yourself from the self-imposed prison. And the next thing is the consumption, right? We live inside a consumption economy, not just of products, but of experiences, identities, relationships, and increasingly healing itself. There's a psychological phenomenon called hedonic treadmill. It refers to our remarkable ability to adapt to anything we acquire. We want something, we get it. We feel a surge of satisfaction. And then within weeks, sometimes days, we return to exactly the same baseline we started at. The thing we wanted stops working. We want the next thing. The treadmill keeps moving. Consumer culture is built on this treadmill. It needs you to keep wanting. It needs your brain to get hooked on it. In the moment you feel genuinely full, you stop being a useful consumer. So the entire system is designed to keep you slightly, perpetually hungry for the next thing and the next thing and the next upgrade, like the iPhone. The next experience that's going to finally make you feel like you're enough, right? If I just fix this thing, I'll be enough. But here's what's important to understand, and that's that this isn't just about buying things, right? We consume relationships, moving from one to the next when they get difficult. We consume spiritual practices, trying this modality, then that retreat, and then the next teacher. And we're always seeking without ever quite arriving. I definitely know I've done that. Right. I have treated life like a box of chocolates. You probably heard me say this before, right? I just take a little bite and put it back if I don't like it. I've gone wide, but I haven't gone deep in the past, right? I haven't spoken, publicly about, what I believe. Honestly, what I believe isn't really relevant to anybody else. It's interesting to me. I know I live in an area where there's people think differently than the way I do, but it doesn't make them bad people. We just have different priorities, different things. Anyways, but we consume healing And this is one that's the hardest to see, right? Circling through therapists and coaches and programs and buying the books and buying the online programs and, you know, with the orientation of a consumer rather than a pilgrim, right? On a voyage. The difference between consuming and building is staying. So meaning is built, much like a house, right? It cannot be consumed. It requires commitment through difficulty, the willingness to stay with something, a practice, a person, a grief, a version of yourself that isn't finished yet, past the point when it stops feeling good. Humans are really good at, seeking pleasure. And then when the pleasure isn't there, we want to move on. I mean, in our marriage, my husband and I, we put the work in. We really do. We've gone to marriage retreats, marriage seminars, marriage counseling, and we've had to learn through our 31 plus years of marriage what commitment really looks like. What it takes. We're very different humans, but the love we have for each other is deep. There were certainly moments when leaving would have been easier. It's, then working through things. Sometimes the gap was wide and we were floating away from each other, both wondering, what are we doing? And yet we stayed because we love each other. We didn't quit. We didn't give up. We didn't throw away everything that we built. See, because consumption says, if this doesn't satisfy, find something else that does. Well, that works at a restaurant. But meaning, real meaning, often lives on the other side of the hard thing in the staying. Now, my husband's not abusive. He's not verbally abusive. He's not emotionally abusive. He's not any sort of abusive. So what I'm talking about would be different than if somebody is in that kind of a situation. So I'm not talking about that. Losing my dad and my brother to addiction, um, in their own ways and in their own time, right? They had consumption problems and they overconsumed because they didn't like what they saw in the mirror. Their lives were void of meaning. That's what they believed inside of themselves. So I've been through a lot, losing my best friend and my mom in the same year, losing my dog, and she died in my arms, right? But those levels of grief and all of that stuff, it did not have a nice little box to put things in. The grief will sometimes catch me off guard. Most of the time, I'm prepared for it. And I polish up my memories. I remember the good things. I remember the way they lived and gave back. And I myself, right, when it comes to consumption, I have looked for relief in a lot of different places. Food became my drug of choice, my soother. Because after I had children, I wasn't going to end up with an alcohol problem because I didn't want my kids to deal with the things that I dealt with. So mind numbing TV and food seemed more like, just readily acceptable, right? But the thing with that is food, you get a little bit and then it's just like the drug. You get the hit and then you need more and you need more and you need more. And before you know it, you've gained 50 pounds. But the meaning, the actual sense that my life has weight and purpose, and that the losses aren't random and suffering, but part of something I'm still building, okay? That hasn't come from what I've found. It's come from what I've refused to abandon, including myself, right? So sticking with it, you know, every time something happens, I look at it and I ask myself, like, this is here trying to teach me something. And I know it can sound brutal and it sounds unfair. And it probably, like to some of you, you're like, oh my God, she's ridiculous because, that all of these things should have some sort of meaning, but they do. And I know this. I know this because I follow that intuition, that inner guidance, that direct connection that I have to whatever you call it, God, source, creator, Mother Earth, right? That divine power that's higher than me. That is my internal GPS. And when I follow that voice, that's when I know there's meaning. And it goes back to being a little girl, just that knowing, that inner knowing. It stopped me from taking my own life. That little voice. It whispered, pick up the phone, Green. And I did. Right? But it's the deepest antidote to the emptiness that consumption promises to fill but can never. So where are you in the in consuming? Where are you in the search of something that can only be built? Where are you in search of meaning? Where are you on the verge of abandoning a relationship or a practice or a version of yourself that might actually need more time and presence rather than replacement? Maybe it's just yourself, right? Is there something larger than you, whatever that looks like for you, that you've been keeping at an arm's length? See, connection, communication, and consumption, those three things, they define the texture of modern life. Three things that at their worst are ways of staying on the surface of a life rather than descending into it. A meaning lives in the descent, not in suffering for its own sake, but in the willingness to go inward, to stay with what's true, to let yourself be known, imperfect, unfinished, carrying things, to build rather than consume, to speak rather than to perform. And every person who has come on this show and told their truth has done something that the culture we live in is not designed to support. They went against the current and they said the thing that was supposed to stay hidden. And on the other side of that, maybe not immediately, and certainly probably not without cost, something opened up. Meaning came back. Not because the hard thing stopped being hard, but because it finally had a place to live. You don't need a podcast to do that. You need one honest conversation, one person who is safe enough to receive what you've been carrying, One true sentence spoken out loud that has never been said before. That's where meaning begins to come back. One true word at a time. And I'm Corrine, and this is the Secret Keepers podcast. And thank you for being here today. You can connect with me on most social platforms and at www.Corrine, it's CORINNE, Zuleger, ZULEGER.com.
Thank you for joining the Secret Keepers podcast. If you found this episode helpful, please give us a like and follow so we can invite you back. And if you just want more, visit CorineZuleger.com. Remember, you're not alone.